Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Many of us would love to do something outstanding with our lives, yet feel stuck and unable to do so. Do we have to stay stuck? What are the mental health myths that keep us stuck? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to uncover these myths is Britt Frank. Britt is a clinician, educator, and trauma specialist. The author of The Science of Stuck and Align Your Mind, Britt received her BA from Duke University and her MSW from the University of Kansas, where she later became an award-winning adjunct professor. She's a somatic experience practitioner and a level 3 trained in the internal family systems therapeutic model. Britt was a primary therapist as a drug and school treatment center, an inpatient therapist at Children's Psychiatric Hospital, and now owns a private practice. Her website, brittfrank.com. Britt, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. This is a wonderful topic. I'm really excited to delve into it a little bit. How did you first become interested in trauma?
So I think for many people, we don't become interested in trauma as much as trauma finds us. And in our journey to understand ourselves, to heal, we learn things along the way. And for me, I was fascinated by the work. And the more I learned and the more I studied and applied this to my own life, the better things became. And I actually didn't come out of undergraduate fully intact as a therapist. I meandered around my life for quite a while, made a early 30s career flip, and I couldn't be more passionate to teach what I teach and to share what I now know.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing it. Your bio states that among your other credentials, that you're a somatic experiencing practitioner. What is that?
It's a mouthful. Somatic experiencing practitioner is a very lovely way of saying, as humans, we live in physical bodies, and often what we think are mindset issues are actually problems originating in the physical structure. And mental health shouldn't be called mental health, because a lot of what we call mental health is a result of our brain's survival adaptations showing up when perhaps they don't need to be. So somatic experiencing practitioner recognizes that we have brains and nervous systems and cells and organs, and consciousness does have to happen within these biological things we call bodies.
Not all in the head, huh?
Nope. If only I could be a floating head, but we are not floating heads.
We might look like it today, but we're not. Okay, so is this like, I know body language, and if a person takes on a position of being contracted, their experience will suddenly contract. Does that relate at all?
It does. And somatic experiencing was pioneered by Dr. Peter Levine, and he has a very long, rich history of doing many things in the hard sciences, one of which was studying animals in the wild and trying to understand, why don't zebras get PTSD after being chased down by a lion? And as humans, what can we learn about how our bodies react from looking at different animals and how their biology is wired? And the basics of, when I'm feeling small and ashamed, I shrink, or if I'm feeling really proud, I expand. Those are the basics of somatic, which just means body, how our bodies encode and express and experience our worlds.
I remember one time I saw a film, and there was a polar bear walking around on the ice, and he'd never seen people. He's clear up in the middle of nowhere, and a helicopter comes over to film him, and he flops down, goes into a full-blown seizure, then gets up and goes on about his business. What are we seeing there that humans don't do?
Oh, it's so fat. They actually show that clip in somatic experiencing trainings as an example of how animals do not get trauma or PTSD. And so this shaking thing that you'll see in animals after they have a near death experience or just narrowly escaped a predator, they'll often start convulsing and then they get up and move about their day. Now, as humans, we actually do the same thing. And anyone who's ever almost been in a car accident knows you slam on your brakes, you narrowly miss rear ending, and then you start shaking. But what happens, because we're logical conscious beings, is we come up with all of these stories as to, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, or there, I want to stop the thing, because shaking is a very unnatural looking way to process big emotions. And so we've sort of talked our way out of the basic survival responses that would enable us to more efficiently move through traumatic experiences.
Yes, you see that in young children. They'll just shake when it's really traumatic. And yet the
Yes,
parents around them might be sitting very still, but they're almost locked down at the same time. Kids come out of it better than the adults until they learn not to shake, right?
it's so true.
So you mentioned becoming stuck. What do you mean by that?
So my body of work, when I talk about stuck, I'm not talking about things like natural disaster or very large scale systemic things. You know, people who are experiencing an earthquake aren't stuck. They're going through a natural disaster. The type of stuck that I refer to is for people who know there's no logical reason why I can't be doing the thing. Whatever the things are that I want to be doing, whether it's going to the gym or eating healthier food or getting social supports, all of the things that we know are, quote, good for us, that many of us struggle to do. What's that gap? Why is it I know what I need to do, but part of me is doing the exact opposite? That gap, researchers call it the intention action gap. I'm very big on declinicalizing our language. Let's just call that's where we get stuck. And my work solves for that sticking point. Most people know once I get to the gym, I'm fine. Once I start the email, I'm fine. But how do we solve for the starting gate? That's what I'm talking about when I talk about being stuck.
So is there underlying trauma that puts us in that position?
Oh, I love that question. Now, the word trauma has become a bit problematic because we have gone as a culture and in the mental health industry from never talking about trauma to this zeitgeist shift into everything is now trauma and every discomfort must be managed and every trigger must be avoided. And so even now as a trauma specialist, I'm hesitant to even use the word trauma because it's become kind of a watered down term. So rather than digging through what's the trauma that might be causing me to struggle with procrastination or with anxiety, I prefer to look at it rather as what happened and why. Let's switch that to what are my resources right now? What are my choices? And how do I move out of overanalysis and rumination into action? Because the opposite of stuck is not insight. The opposite of stuck is movement.
So, if I'm hearing you right, where you're trying to come from a place of, micromanaging our past experience and thrashing it around to try to get to the point where we can move, when indeed it sounds like you're suggesting maybe a neurological reprogramming. In other words, don't you start butting up against the same neurological pathways when you get stuck? Are you saying try to have a different experience and then try to burn new neurological pathways around that?
And I'm also mindful not to invalidate people who do have trauma, me being one of them. I have a fairly extensive personal trauma narrative stemming from childhood and onward through adulthood. So I'm certainly not saying that the things that happen to us don't impact us, but often the thing that keeps us stuck is this idea that if I understand why I'm stuck, that will get me moving. That will solve my problem. And that's just not true. There are lots of reasons that I was stuck in addiction, in my dysfunction. And I could very clearly tell you, well, I am stuck with this because of that. But we don't want to start with this analysis on the beginning of the journey. So I tell people the why, that matters, but let's shelve the why for later, because right now, as you said, we have these physiological responses, the fight, flight, freeze response, and we're not going to get anywhere by analyzing them. we get out of fight, flight, freeze by doing these somatic, these body-based types of things that help us to get momentum. And after we get rolling, if you still want to know why you're stuck, then we can analyze that and figure it out. Often people don't really need to know why. Once they feel better and are able to move forward, at that point, the why is secondary.
It's so easy to get stuck in our trauma
Mhm.
stories too, isn't it?
Yes, they're compelling. And again, I have a lot of compassion because often trauma stories are traumatic largely because they've never been witnessed. And we know that trauma does heal in the presence of a safe and supportive witness. So having someone be able to hear the content of our experience is important, but that becomes a little bit of a sticky situation when now we get into the I'm retelling my story over and over and over to the point of numbness. Being able to tell a traumatic story from a place of numbness isn't healing, it's just a dissociation. And I love the somatic work because it doesn't require you to remember all or any of what happened. Many people experience things pre-verbal where we don't have the brain structure even available to form memory. And so it's wonderful news that, as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. So even if you can't remember what happened, you don't need to, because the story is etched in your symptoms and etched in your patterns. And we can learn a lot from the present without having to go dig through the past.
So what does a somatic session look like?
So a somatic session could look any number of ways. You know, the most extreme being if you were to peer into my office during a somatic session, you might see someone shaking, but you might see someone doing something as simple as holding an ice cube. Because what happens with trauma and what happens just living in a modern world with smartphones and microwaves and the internet, and our brains haven't really adapted to the technology, we've become disconnected from our felt sense. And so something as simple as, hey, put an ice cube in your hands. Does it feel cold? Does it feel wet? How does your cold hand feel compared to your dry hand? And that seems silly. That seems like a very interesting use of time and money in therapy. But until we can reconnect with our felt sense, those stories are going to stay stuck in our physiology. So baby stepping into what's it like to have a felt sense with hot, with cold. And if you can't do hot and cold, things like shame and fear and terror are really hard to manage. So we start small, we build capacity for the felt sense, and that's how you metabolize a traumatic experience.
Do people disassociate from their bodies because that's where they experienced the trauma in the first place?
I sure do. I don't know about you. And it's important as I'm sharing that clinically, yes, I'm trained to do all of these things, but I'm still very much human. And I also inhabit a body that often I prefer to leave. And dissociation can be as mild as I missed my exit on the highway to as severe as I've lost entire chunks of time and I don't know where and when I even am. But we all dissociate to a degree. And dissociation is helpful because it's really hard to live in your body all of the time. If we were to feel every feeling and think every thought and be conscious of every sensation, we would probably be non-functional. That's why I always say you don't need to kill your ego. Your ego is a great filtration system. We just don't want the ego to run the show.
Well, it's time for us to take a station break. Britt and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are you stuck in the mud? With us this hour discussing possible cases of immobility is Britt Frank, the author of The Science of Stuck and Align Your Mind. Britt, we were talking about how so much seems to be anchored in the body, that we can process it mentally and emotionally, but it's still anchored in the body. And do we run across memories in the body when we start becoming present in our body? Do we run across those stories?
It's so frustrating and terrifying if you don't, and you, I mean me, because I didn't understand that our bodies do hold memories, which is why understanding the origin of every trigger isn't necessary. I'll give you a really silly example just to highlight it. Let's say when I was a baby, I had a purple nursery. And let's say every night, this isn't true, I'm just making this up. But let's say every night my parents would come in the nursery and scream at each other. And every night they would just scream, scream, scream. I don't have the capacity to remember any of that, but somehow as an adult, the color purple makes me feel anxious. And anytime I'm in a purple environment, I suddenly and inexplicably get sweaty and panicky. I might go to a therapist and say, I don't know why this purple room trips me out. What's wrong with me? Do I have a disorder? And a competent therapist who understands that our bodies do hold memories would say, I don't know what your body's responding to, but, and here's the thing, let's start with the assumption that your body is very smart. And even if we don't know why it's reacting, we're going to give your brain the benefit of the doubt and go, okay, something happened that's creating this reaction, but understanding the why it happened is less important than asking, what are my choices? Anywhere we're conscious of choice, our brains will be less reactive. Because if you were being chased by a lion, you wouldn't be, what are my options and how can I think? And again, it's not about decision fatigue. It's about what are my choices in this moment to help myself feel a little less unsafe or a little bit less activated, even if there's no logical reason why I am. Because our brains know what they're doing. They've been doing brain things as long as we've been here. And so I'm inclined, rather than to pathologize or to label things we don't understand as disorders, to rather call it a response. So I am very big on not calling things like anxiety or depression or even addiction disorders. I call them anxiety responses, depression responses, addictive responses, not to minimize their impact, but to reframe them as this did not happen out of nowhere. So instead of analyzing why, let's figure out what are our choices so we can heal, feel better, and move forward.
So sounds pretty basic, like stepping out of being a victim and finding a way to take action.
Which, yes. And I remember early in my journey, I was so offended when a therapist said to me, you know, you're very invested in this victim narrative. And I was, how dare you call me a victim? Yes, I had terrible things happen to me. And what I've since learned in my own therapy and as a practicing therapist, validating the reality of what happened to you and that you were victimized doesn't mean you're a victim. And those are two very different orientations. Victim means I have no choices, I have no power, there's nothing I can do about anything. Victimized means I had no choice about that, and I have no choice about what they're doing or what's happening over there. But I do have agency and autonomy in what I am willing and able to do right now. And I fought against that, but you can validate the reality of pain while still staying in an empowered, choice-based place.
It's hugely important in this day and age, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So why do we get stuck, but why do we stay stuck?
So I'm very big on, again, de-shaming this whole process. You know, again, I was a drug addict. I had eating disorders, OCD. My list of diagnoses was not short, and it's not like they're all gone. I don't struggle with them actively now for the most part. OCD still creeps up. But the thing about stuck that we don't talk about is that there are benefits to staying stuck. And without shaming ourselves or beating ourselves up, we want to approach stuckness like a business would approach their bottom line. You have to do a cost benefit analysis in the business world. Why not do the same thing? Well, what kind of benefit are you getting from being a drug addict? I'll speak for myself. Well, as long as I was addicted to drugs, that kept me very busy. And I didn't have to deal with certain realities that I wasn't willing to deal with. I wasn't having to deal with certain griefs that I wasn't willing to face. And so I'm not saying addiction is good. I'm saying it is functional. And understanding the function of a behavior is really helpful if we want to solve it and make that behavior irrelevant to our day-to-day.
So if you understand the function, then you can decide a replacement possibly to start walking you out of it. That makes perfect sense to me. Sometimes it seems like we, particularly if we've had traumatic past, we tend to try to find the little ways that we have safe passage. Okay, particularly as children, we don't have that many resources. And then we create a place where we stay within the lines that we've drawn, that's safe passage. Is that another form of being stuck?
As a child, it's not. So a child
Right.
who dissociates or who shuts down or just totally leaves their body, I would high five that kid and say, well done surviving your story. But
Mhm.
the things that enabled us to survive as children are the very things that keep us stuck as adults. If you don't risk relationship, if you never follow a passion project, if you don't do things, then you don't have to worry about failing at things. And you do stay within that safe passage. But that safe passage also eliminates the possibility of joy and wonder and awe and connection and marveling at things. And so, unfortunately, you can't block out everything, or you can't block out some things and not others. If you're going to block, you have to block everything. And that's my argument for why risking those things is unpleasant and uncomfortable, but well worth the effort.
So that would be a form of OCD, wouldn't it? Staying in the same pattern, regardless if it's expedient or not.
Exactly. And again, my OCD took the form of hair pulling, trichotillomania, which was
Oh,
this
sure.
compulsion to just pull hair out of my head. It's
Oh,
a and again, why did my brain default to that instead of hand washing or counting or any of the other forms? I have no idea. And I'm okay. My brain decided that's what I needed. So fine. But it does keep you on a loop of there's no time or space to do anything or feel anything or think anything when you're on a repetitive loop. And so my mission is to help people befriend their own minds. We treat our minds like they're our enemies. I'm fighting this disease and I'm battling the scale. And well, what if instead of that, we looked at our brains as well meaning, but perhaps unskilled helpers and stopping the war in our own minds, because it can be very hostile to live inside these bodies, particularly if we're yelling at ourselves all day. You're not going to solve the problem of stuck by yelling at yourself. Shaming ourselves into healthy, happy lives does not work.
darn.
I
I'm good
know.
at shaming myself.
Me too.
So how can one tell if they're stuck? What are the symptoms? You gave a few: counting, pulling your hair. There's ways that we what all are the signs that, ooh, we're stuck and we're stuck in an OCD pattern?
And again, not everyone has like clinical level OCD, but a good question to ask whether or not you're stuck is, well, how's your life working? What's your relationship like to food? Do you have a peaceful relationship with money? How are your social relationships? If we're willing to actually open up the hood and look underneath, it's not hard to figure out whether or not we're stuck. And when I hear people say, I'm not stuck, I'm fine, everything is fine, my answer is, okay, that's great. How true is that? Usually there's at least one area, even the most successful, high functioning people can identify as being stuck. That's why I like the word stuck, because it involves everybody. It's not just for people with trauma. It's not just for people with a mental health challenge. If you're a human with a pulse, likely you're going to get stuck somewhere at some point to some degree.
And let's talk about these over creative, overachieving kind of people that are always moving forward, always got a project. That's a form of stuck too. It sounds like.
Hmm. It's a functional stuckness, and it's very validated because look at me. I'm doing great things in the world, and I work in my private practice with a lot of people who do wonderful things on behalf of the world and their companies and the people that work for them. But it's not enough to do well. We also want to be well. And sometimes all of that doing comes at the expense of our being. And it's not enough to do well. We want to actually feel okay at the end of the day and feel at the end of the day like we're enough, like our contributions are valuable. Because what's the point of doing all that good if you feel terrible at the end of every day? And so, yes, doing well is only half the story. We want to be well while doing well.
Uh, Feel like we've done all sorts of things during the day, and then we have to self-medicate at night. That doesn't seem like.
Exactly.
And you touched in on this a little bit, but why can't we think our way out of stuck?
I wish we could, because my brain is so good at coming up with all kinds of stories and rationales. I call it my story maker in my head. But the reason we can't think our way out of stuck, because often our stuckness is a fight, flight, freeze state. It's physiological. And
Mm.
so you can't think your way out of your body's states. That would be like if I were saying to you, why can't I just think my kitchen clean? My kitchen's a mess, and here's why it's a mess. And if I just think hard enough or chant my affirmations long enough, my kitchen will get clean. Now, I'm very pro affirmation, but you can talk about, think about, pray about, ruminate about the kitchen all day. The kitchen doesn't get cleaned until you go in there and put the dishes away. And often our stuckness requires movements, not insight.
So, how big a part does guilt play in this? I know people hate to feel guilty. And do we spend a lot of time avoiding our guilt and keeping stuck in that way?
Guilt is a very unpleasant one. The upside of guilt is, and I like to tell people, if you're feeling guilty, that's a great sign that you're not a sociopath. So the inability to feel guilt is actually not a good thing. That's a terrible thing, to have no guilt whatsoever. Guilt is, I did something that's not in alignment with my values, and so now I don't feel great. Shame is, I am bad. Guilt is, I did something bad. Shame is not helpful, but guilt is great. Guilt is wonderful to help us know when we're misaligned. And so if we're avoiding our own guilt, I would say feeling guilt doesn't usually cause harm, but the myriad ways we try to avoid guilt, most of those cause great harm. And so as unpleasant as it is, the fastest way through guilt is through the guilt, not around it or under or over it.
Have to examine it and get on the other side. I like the way you brought up shame being a big issue here. Um, do we turn guilt into shame?
I think shame and guilt often get equated with each other, and that stems back often to childhood, when shame on you, and it's very hard to differentiate I did something wrong from I am something wrong.
You
My
bad boy kind of
mistakes,
stuff. Mhm.
bad boy, bad, right, the good girl, bad. And we're taught as children to divide the world into the good guys and the bad guys. And if you look at children's, I was a play therapist when I started my career, and if you look at children's games and stories, there's the good guys that do the good thing and the bad guys that do the bad thing. And so it's very confusing for children when they do something wrong to go, well, if there's good guys and bad guys and I did something bad, that must mean I'm a bad guy. And so it's important, especially with little humans, to let them know there's complexity, and good people can do bad things and bad people can do good things. And inside all of us is the capacity for good and bad. And our job is to manage it, not to identify with one side or the other.
Boy, that identify with your story, identify with good or bad. It's a beastie, isn't it?
It's in there. It's baked in, and it's hard to shake. It's really hard to shake. I want to be a good person. Well, there's no such thing as a good person. There are just
Exactly.
people, and we manage what's inside us, and we decide on our actions to the degree we can. And you can't be a good person. You're a whole person, and that's better.
Well, it's time for yet another station break. Britt and I will be right discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What are the hidden results of trauma? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing moving beyond trauma is Britt Frank. Her website, brittfrank.com. Britt, when a person has trauma and then they think, okay, I'm beyond it, I'm going on about my business, but things aren't exactly the same as they were before. How can we tell that we indeed do need a little bit of help to come back to who we were?
I think the missing piece to the trauma conversation that is so important is grief, and the importance of understanding what it means to grieve, because you can't go back to who you were before. I know there's a saying, I don't know who to attribute it to, is that you can't step in the same river twice. And so this idea that I can somehow get back to the person I was before the trauma, well, that's not a thing. And so we can't change what happened. Now, that doesn't mean we can't move forward and create a life that's rich and beautiful and full, but trauma carves us into a new shape. And the grieving process is necessary to help us acclimate to the new shape and to mourn the things that don't get to be as a result of the trauma. I love my life now, and I would not wish for my life to be any different, but it's certainly did not take the shape of what I would have wished for as a child. I would have wished for safety and for things to have not gone wrong, but I can't get back to that. What I can do is figure out, how do I paint with this brush loaded with these colors that have now been handed to me? And so there's a grief that I think our culture does us a great disservice by equating grief with death, and that's all you get. That's all it is. But grief is about any loss or any change is going to involve a degree of grieving, and that's an important skill to build.
So first you move through the grief, or in the process of moving through grief, but then do you have to transmute the traumatic experience into growth?
Mm. So that one's a tricky one. The short, pithy answer is yes. Every trauma has an opportunity in it to redefine your ability to be of service to the world and your capacity for empathy and joy. I don't like giving trauma that much credit. And so you can look at it as a transmutation or an alchemy, but it's just as easy to say what happened to me happens, but it doesn't define me. And my offering to myself, my community, and to the world may include the trauma story, but it doesn't have to. I became a therapist because I was fascinated by how humans human, less than the desire to be of help. The fact that my job is helpful is a bonus, but I don't think your trauma has to become the thing that you're now focused on. It can be, but it's also really good news to know what happened to you doesn't need to define your passions or your purpose moving forward. It can simply inform which direction you may choose to go.
We can choose to buckle underneath it and get stuck, or we can choose to move through it and take advantage of the new tools we may have or may not have. Is that pretty much where we're coming from here?
I think so.
Always
Yes.
that choice thing again.
And there are some people for whom the choices are not there. Not everyone can go to therapy. Not everyone has the resources to get the tools that are useful to help with the healing process. So I like to say, to the degree that choices are available, that is the degree that you're able to heal and grow. If you have only one or two choices, great, let's take them and let's run with them. But it's not your fault if you only have a limited array of options. But what happens is people will say, I have no choices. And that's just not always true. You may not like your choices, but properly identifying them is a good starting place if you're feeling stuck.
Let's back up a little bit. And you were talking about children and how they might disassociate, or they might do this, or they might do that. Well, they're still living in the middle of the situation that's causing the trauma. So that's not a time when we want to make choices. What we have there is working very well. Thank you very much. At which point, can we tell that it's time to graduate from there? That it's time to move beyond the coping mechanisms that are keeping us stuck?
And it's tricky, right? When I used to work inpatient in a children's psychiatric hospital, children coming in with unspeakable levels of trauma, the types of things that you see on TV, it's just horrific. There's nothing I'm going to do to enable them to cope with or process or get through that story. Like you said, if it's still happening, it's not PTSD until it's post. If it's happening, then I think of myself less as a therapist and more as a travel companion. I'm just going to be a safe place for the time we're together to witness you and your humanity, knowing that I can't do anything other than be a travel companion. And so how do we know when it's time? Again, looking at the level of safety and the level of resources. If you have relative safety and access to resources, then I would say, all right, now it's time to move from let's just be in it together to now let's start climbing and moving and seeing what we can do to get unstuck, so to speak.
So is the stage of mourning in between those two?
I think the mourning happens a little throughout the whole thing, right? I don't live in a perpetual state of grief, but there are times where I'll see something or smell something or hear something, and it sort of brings that, well, it would have been nice if that thing didn't happen. And mourning doesn't have to be weeks and weeks and months of flagellating and covering the mirrors, and those large grief rituals can be helpful. But sometimes grief might look like me giving myself an extra 5 minutes in the car to honor, hey, this is the part of town where that bad thing happens, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes before I go do my Target run to at least honor the me that survived that thing. And we make it very complicated when we attach all of these. Well, in order to do this, I have to do this, and I have to have this special notebook and these special shoes. It's anywhere you can work in grief and mourning, it makes it a lot less cumbersome when you do it a little bit at a time. It's like letting steam out of a kettle.
Well, those cumbersome tools look like they're part of being stuck if you're not careful.
The things that we use to heal us can often become the instruments of stuckness if we're not mindful. That is true.
So is there such a thing as self-sabotage?
Oh, sorry. I get my little evil laugh with that. And again, the terms that we use to describe our dilemmas are very, very important. Self-sabotage is not a thing. Now, am I saying that we don't make choices that annihilate our well-being? Of course not. Again, I was a drug addict. Clearly, I was making choices that were counter to my health and my sanity. But self-sabotage, what we call self-sabotage, is actually a very misguided and unhealthy, but still well-intended form of self-protection. If I sabotage myself, I'm not risking rejection or failure or being seen or any of those things. And so I'm not saying self-sabotage is good. I'm saying we shouldn't call it sabotage, because it's not. Just like panic doesn't attack us, panic informs us. Sabotage is not really what's happening. It's we're trying to stay small and invisible so we don't get eaten by lions. And using the proper names for things is very helpful in helping us move through a dilemma.
Languaging is so important in all of this, isn't it? Let's talk about being stuck in the past. It seems like the only time we do have choices is in the present. If we're in the past, we can't make different choices. But it also seems like most people are either stuck in their past trauma or catastrophizing about tomorrow. How important is it to be present, and how do we do that?
So the thing I like to say is the past stays present until we process it. So the past stays present until processed, which means this idea that the past is in the past. Again, time is a construct we created to make sense of the chaos of existence, but it's not like you leave your past in some mythical place that we call the past. Your past is in your cells and your organs and your tissues and your neural pattern, your neural network and your patterns and your habits. And so you can't really leave the past. You can process it so you can open up your menu of choices. You can process the past so you're not trying to repeat it, but leaving something in a mystical place that doesn't exist is not an option. So people who like to say, well, that's all over and done with, it's in the past. Well, no, it's in your nervous system. So it's probably good that we learn to drive that thing. And like you said, the only place that you can drive your nervous system is right now. Now is where the choices are. Now is where the sensations and the feelings are. Now is where our bodies are. And so there's not a whole lot to be done with these mythical ideas of past and future.
So in the beginning, you mentioned how it's important not to get stuck in the story so much as to find other options. And now you're telling me that you have to process something or it's never in the past. So what's the difference between processing and digging into the story?
That's so good, right? And again, you don't need to know the story. So let's go back to my example of, let's say I was a baby in a purple room, my parents were fighting, and now every time I see purple, I have a panic episode. Okay. I may not know why I'm having a panic episode, but in therapy, processing it might mean I slowly and gradually train my body to reassociate purple with nothing happens. Like, look, I'm in a purple room, but nothing bad is happening. No one is screaming. No one is being hurt. And we need to train our brains to unassociate things that got linked together and then reassociate things that, I'll give you a practical example. So one of the pieces of my history include very, very high conflict, violent, very unhealthy relationships. And so I am now married to a wonderful, reasonably healthy human who I adore. And we have gone back to some of those places, those cities where those other relationships were, because I didn't want to associate the mountains of Arizona with this bad thing. Every time I saw those mountains, now my body is shaking. Now I have learned to untangle those two things, and I've reassociated those mountains with my wonderful life that I have now. And so that's what processing means. It means we want to unglue the things that got glued together that we don't want together. And they call it coupling in the trauma world. We want to uncouple things that we don't want together, and we want to recouple things that we do want together. So uncoupling purple from danger, recoupling mountains with safety. And that's how you process the past in the present.
Does that have to happen on all 4 levels: physical, mental, emotional, and energetic?
I mean, I know the right answer is yes, but I think sometimes those other things aren't available. Going back to the purple example, I might not have any idea emotionally or mentally what happens. So energetically, I think I can feel what's happening in my body, and physically, I think it's ideal to process on all levels. But if you don't have access to the sensations in your body, then let's start with the energetics. If you don't have access to the energy, let's start with your mindset. And so we want to start with what's available with the goal of expanding that so we can process it on every level.
Have you ever seen anybody be able to do that on all 4 levels?
No, I certainly haven't. Well, not all at once at the same time indefinitely. There are times where I'm not tripped out in any way by anything. And there are times when the littlest things are tripping all my wires. So I think there's a degree of grace for your human experience to know that having peace of mind on all 4 levels is available. Probably in psychedelic induced states, that's available. But in our general day-to-day humaning, I wouldn't have that expectation of myself or anyone else. I would go with, can we get 51% of this done? If we can stay at 51%, we're going to call that a win.
It seems like in this day and age, so much of our personality is tied up in our dysfunction, isn't it?
And that's a big problem because we know as humans that we want that social connection. And often you'll find a great deal of company when your social connection is clustered around something bad. And like addiction in the 12-step rooms, when I stopped identifying as an addict, because I don't subscribe to that particular model, I wasn't welcome in those rooms anymore. And suddenly, because I no longer identified with the problem, I lost all my people.
There
and
you
so
go.
that is one of the unfortunate things.
It's time for us to take another station break, but stick with us. Britt and I will continue to talk about trauma and avoiding it. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Does anxiety drive your life? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Britt Frank. Her website, brittfrank.com. Britt, does anxiety drive us? And how much does it? Why do so many people suffer from anxiety?
So, I love this topic so much. When, anxiety is the most commonly diagnosed mental illness in this country, when 40 million Americans are identifying with an anxiety, quote, disorder, you have to ask, is it that 40 million of us are now have this incurable thing that we have to manage for the rest of our lives? Or perhaps is our understanding of anxiety in need of an update? And my argument as a trained clinician is what we call mental illness is often a body response. And even more often, that body response makes a lot of sense. If someone comes to me and says, I have diagnosed myself from the internet with an anxiety disorder, I would start with, are you getting sleep? How much coffee are you drinking? How much time are you spending on social media versus outside in nature? When was the last time you ate anything resembling a full meal versus just running around grabbing snacks? And so I think it's important to name that there are lots of problems in the world. But when we say that anxiety is a disorder, I'm not saying it's not problematic. Yes, of course, it's a problem. I've had it my whole life and we need to manage it. And often we need help from every available resource to manage it. But I don't think of anxiety as a disorder as much as the alarm system of the brain. I've never seen an instance where someone with high levels of anxiety did not have a pretty good reason why that anxiety was there sounding the alarm. It's sort of like a toddler. If you ignore a toddler long enough, you're going to have a meltdown. And our brains are not content to let us melt down. And the alarm will get louder and louder until we listen to it. And as much as we want to not know what we know and not have to do the things that we know we have to do, anxiety is a sign that something is off and needs our attention. It's like a smoke alarm. You don't want to disable the smoke alarm because you need it to tell you if there's a fire. Anxiety is the smoke alarm of the brain. I don't like it either, but it is necessary. And I do not look at it as a disorder.
So the thing that's out of balance can be on in any of the 4 levels, right? Or
Yes.
several of them.
It could be all of them.
Mhm.
And anxiety is a sign that there's an injury. And so, if you think of leprosy, when people think of leprosy, sort of the biblical idea of leprosy is these disfigured people. What leprosy does is it deactivates your nerves so you don't have any pain signals. And if we don't have pain, how are we going to know if a knife is sharp or if a stove is hot? We actually need those pain receptors to tell us, hey, stop doing that. That's bad for you. Anxiety is one of those things that if we didn't have it, we would be endlessly in dangerous situations with dangerous people, having no sense of, hey, maybe don't go left here, maybe turn right there, maybe don't walk off that cliff. And so as much as I don't like it, anxiety is our partner in healing. It is not the enemy of our healing. We have to work with it and learn to understand it and decode it because it is trying to help us.
If we see it as a message instead of an enemy, I worked with a lady one time, and she just kept having anxiety about her health, and she just felt something's wrong, but she seemed perfectly healthy until she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Is that an example of how our anxiety is really trying to show us something is wrong when we can't necessarily lay our finger on it?
It's yes, and it's tricky, right? Because for that woman, her anxiety about her health was in fact tied to a health problem. But sometimes I used to have a hypochondria and I would obsess over what is this health concerned? But what was actually wrong were my relationships. And I didn't want to look at my relationships. So my health anxiety, the anxiety was right. The object I attached it to was not actually my health. And so it's important to validate that, yes, anxiety is a message, but it's not always what you think it is. And it's not always about what we think it's about, which makes it a little sticky.
In that example, it sounds like we can use anxiety as a distraction from what really is the issue.
Exactly. Or certainly the symptoms, which are terrifying and can be medically dangerous in some cases. But anxiety is the roadmap that leads us out of being stuck. And we'll take that anxiety and then say, this is why I'm stuck. I'm stuck because I'm anxious. It's like, well, not really. Your anxiety
You're
is
anxious because you're stuck.
exactly. And then it becomes a loop. And so anxiety is necessary as an indicator light, but the light isn't the problem. If my check engine light came on, I'm not going to go to a mechanic and say, I have check engine light disorder because see, the light's on, therefore I have a disorder. It's the light's on, help me figure out what's going on with my car because I don't speak mechanics. That is not my language.
I just got this mental image of your shop when you go in and say that. Here's a real wingnut. Can one be suffering from long-term anxiety and not really even know it?
Absolutely. Anxiety can take the form of workaholism. It can take the form as procrastination. It can take the form of depression. Anxiety is one of those shape-shifting types of things. I mean, anxiety at its basics is an activated nervous system. So if we're going with the car metaphor, it's a car with too much gas. Depression is a car with too much brake. But sometimes anxiety will shapeshift and show up in lots of different ways. And again, if we get quiet enough to go inside and actually ask ourselves, so what's going on in here? Not everyone can say, this is why I'm anxious, but we can all say, I wonder what this anxiety might be trying to tell me. And that's an important question. And assuming it's on our side and it's not, when we think the enemy of our well-being lives inside our heads, then there's no escape. And that creates a cycle of chemicals and hormones and things that we don't want, which make us feel worse. We have to start with the assumption that I don't know what's going on. I may not know why, but my brain is on my side and it's trying to help me.
Trying to tell me something. What is it?
Mm-hmm.
How can a person tell if they suffer from anxiety?
How can a person tell if they suffer from anxiety? Again, I would go back to, how's your relationship with sleep, with food, with money, with intimacy, and with pleasure and play? If often, if anxiety is present, play is the first thing that gets obliterated. And play, children know this. As adults, we untrain it from ourselves. Play is one of the fastest ways to rewire our brains. So we know to learn something, we either have to repeat it 20, 30 times, or if it's in the context of play, I think that number goes down to like 6. And so the capacity for play and delight and pleasure usually goes up as our anxiety goes down. So I would start with, when was the last time you danced or sang or felt silly or were playful? And if the answer is, if you have to think that hard, it's been too long. And so play is very uncomfortable for adults, but it's one of the most powerful anti-anxiety medicines available.
So it sounds like play engages motion and the body. It goes back to the somatic stuff.
Exactly. And so when I had my kids practice, when I had adults who struggled with anxiety, I would bring them into my kids' office and we would do really silly things, play catch, get in the sandbox and move little objects around. But like you said, when you're engaging your tactile sense and your visual sense and you're moving, that's telling your brain, hey, there's no lion, so we can bring it down a few notches. And so play does a lot of jobs on our behalf. It is not a waste of time. It's not recreational, and it's certainly not just for children. It's for anyone with a brain and a pulse.
Well, Britt, it's the time in the show when I get to ask you, what's your mission?
My mission is to take the enemy out of our own heads, and so we can make friends with our minds. It's a fascinating world in there. And when you make friends with all the parts of yourself, you'll realize that not only are you not alone, you never have been and you never will be.
Do you feel that that's our connecting point with others as well?
I do. I think you don't need to know yourself to connect with others. I mean, babies can connect and they don't have the capacity to self-reflect. But I think the degree to which we understand ourselves is the degree to which then I know which types of people might be ideal for me and which types of people might be less than ideal for me. And so the more that we make friends with the different parts of our minds, the more choices that we can tee up. And as we know, the presence of choices equals the reduction of activation and anxiety and trauma and all those things we don't want.
So how important is gratitude in all of this?
I'm not anti-gratitude, but I think that gratitude, when it's coded as I have to give thanks outwards for things, can take us away from ourselves. So I think a gratitude practice that fails to include yourself and even your biology. I'm grateful that my stomach digested the sandwich I had for lunch so I could speak with you today. I'm grateful for my feet that were able to bring me into my office today. And so a gratitude practice that fails to include yourself, both your mind and your body, I would say is incomplete.
I'm totally with you. It's always has to start within, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So how can we evolve the way we deal with anxiety and being stuck?
The language is, I think, the first line intervention, right? Panic doesn't attack, panic informs. And so if you're saying to yourself, I'm having an anxiety attack, your brain's going to hear the word attack, take that literally, and then shut you down to conserve your life functions, because our brains are very wise, but they're also quite literal. And so we want to take this war language out of it. I'm not battling anything. I'm experiencing some conflict and turbulence and some misunderstandings inside my own head. But taking this language of battle and attacking off the table and getting really specific. What am I experiencing? What am I sensing on the inside? What are my choices on the outside? That will get us a lot further than yelling and beating ourselves up for our brains doing what brains are supposed to do, which is keep us alive.
And where do our emotions fit in this?
So I say emotions are body sensations with little stories attached to them. And so if I'm feeling a racing heart and sweaty palms and a tight stomach, that's information. Now, if I'm about to go run a marathon, the emotion might be excitement. Excitement is all of those body sensations with a story of I'm about to do a race that I've been training for. But I could take that same exact set of sensations, racing heart, sweaty palms, clenched stomach. And if I'm about to have a hard conversation with someone I care about, I might code that emotion as fear. And so emotions require us to go, what are the body sensations and what's the story? Sometimes our stories are inaccurate, but not always. I might legitimately be feeling fear about that conversation. And so understanding our emotions starts with understanding that emotions are body sensations plus story. First, let's check on that, make sure that checks out. And then after that, it goes back to choice. Okay, given that I'm experiencing fear, are my options to take a quick walk before the conversation? Are my options to sit in my car and do some breathing? Is one of my choices to give gratitude to myself for having the courage to have the conversation. And so really getting into those nitty-gritties of emotions rather than feeling like they just happen to us and are overwhelming and there's nothing we can do. There's a lot we can do, not to get rid of them, but to at least contain them so that they're understandable and manageable. That's doable.
So this has been a wonderful conversation, and I think that everything that we've brought forth is so important for people to know right now. But unfortunately, Britt, we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Our guest this hour has been Britt Frank, the author of The Science of Stuck and Align Your Mind. To find out more about Britt, where you can find her books and all she has to offer, visit her website, brittfrank.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes on us, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join me right here next time. This mission is going to continue bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.